Okay, so I am Nick. So I am here to give this talk about cybersecurity awareness, training through experiencing the adversarial mindset, also on behalf of Jens, who I wrote this together with, who's also here today, and our supervisors, Oksana Kulyuk and Carsten Schürmann. And we are all from the IT University of Copenhagen in Denmark. So existing IT security awareness training is very often quite traditional in the educational methods that they use. They often look like the examples that I put on the slide here, and they can be checklists. They're often e-learnings, posters, videos, but in a very sort of chore that you have to endure as an employee way. And this traditional approach comes together with a focus on rules and conveying the importance rather than sort of explaining you why. It's more giving you, this is very important and please just do what we say. Additionally to that, they often focus on very specific threats. We've seen the examples earlier today as well. For example, on phishing, it's a very important security threat, but it's the one that's most often covered. So then a little bit about the motivation for our project is we thought, how can we do this better? We see these data legislation coming into play, GDPR that was mentioned already. So IT security awareness has an increased focus, at least what we are seeing in Europe. And that means that also the training is becoming more widespread. More and more companies seem to be convinced now that it's not only IT people that need security awareness, but it's broader than that. And the examples that we've shown are very common in at least the companies in Denmark for their IT security awareness training. So, but the question is, how well are they at actually affecting the behavior of these employees who follow these trainings? They often focus, as I said, on conveying some knowledge, but mostly some checklists, some rules, and sort of saying like, please just do what we say. And Jens and I were both in a introduction to IT security course where we got to do some capture the flag exercises, where we got to hack some things ourselves. And we noticed that the effect that this has on computer science students, so that's people who are already familiar with computers, who know quite a lot about cybersecurity, and it prompted a lot of people out of that experience of seeing how easy it was or what you could do when you were hacking, even though you knew it from a theoretical perspective. They started changing their passwords, taking an extra look at their password manager, enabling two-factor authentication, etc. So our thought was, can we give this same experience to less tech-savvy participants? So the goal of our training that we developed was to see, can we increase understanding and thereby motivate people to take care of their security? Our hypothesis informally was that people know that IT security is important. They know that they shouldn't reuse passwords, but it's such a hassle. Why do I need to do this update right now? So that is our goal, to increase understanding rather than go over the same rules again and scare people into this is important. So the formal research question is, does experiencing IT security from an attacker's perspective motivate users towards better security behavior? And then the target of our study were non-technical office workers, so people who work with a computer every day, but where it's not, they're not IT folks, so to say. And the way we try to do this is by making a proof of concept, a prototype, inspired by capture the flag exercises, which is common in computer science education, and give that same experience with the hope that we can give security some context and motivate these non-technical office users to take care of their security. So we use protection motivation theory, or PMT, which is theorizes that based on threat appraisal and coping appraisal, people get motivated to take preventative measures against threats. And so we looked at the perception, so the probability and severity of security breaches, or the concern that our participants had about them, and the efficacy of a potential response and self-efficacy, and the attitude towards it. So the study was a pre-post study, as we've seen earlier today as well, based on the prototype that I'll show you in a little bit. We had 34 participants working all in private organizations in Denmark, and they were all office employees. So they all filled out the survey beforehand, then interacted with our prototype training, and we evaluated them with a second survey to see whether there was improvement based on the constructs from PMT. And another focus we had during our research is to use established instructional design principles. So, as I said, the goal was experiencing being the hacker. It had to be interactive and game-like. You could call it a serious game. And we wanted it to be real, or at least realistic. So our goal was to try and give as much of the real sort of hacking tools, for example, something simple like Metasploit, which people in this room might know, but is very advanced for non-IT folks. But we wanted to show what kind of tools are out there, and at the end be able to say, this is real tools, so this was not a simulation. And so the focus is understanding over knowledge. And as I said, we try to use as many sort of established instructional design principles to make sure that we really build a well-founded training that also conveys the message well. So this is a screenshot for our prototype. As the users logged in, they were presented some introduction to the challenge and the background information that was necessary. And then they got access to a virtual computer, which you can see on the left side, which it's a minimal computer, but it has all the basic tools required for the exercise installed. And on the right side, they had a guide that will guide them through all the activities that they needed to do to become a hacker. So they can open a browser, they can access some fake websites that we created that looked realistic or at least familiar. This one is one that's obviously a legacy system, as the design suggests. And as you could see what happened on the right, you could check off whenever you completed the task. Then, as I said, we were having the users use some quite advanced tools, use the command line, and we introduced, for those who were interested in it, some extra details where they could hover over the output and see what does this actually mean. But in order to not lose their attention or focus, we also made sure that there was always sort of a shortcut to just continue if you didn't understand or got stuck. And if you completed the task, at the end of every exercise this was a wipe command, and then you could see a website go down to sort of highlight the big effect that a simple hack may have. And upon the completion of a section, which we call a challenge, you got a debriefing where you were explained what you have just done, what the consequences are, and what could have been done to prevent it, to sort of give you an understanding of how security risks start. So one of the challenges focuses around password stuffing, insecure user passwords because it's relatable, and the other one was about lack of updates, so for known vulnerabilities, and our focus in the debriefing sections was to highlight why was this a problem, right? And that everyone, even a simple employee, can have an influence on that. So our results showed that there was actually an increase in motivation amongst our participants. This is just an example of one of the constructs that we evaluated. As you can see, this was all on a 7-point scale, and then the changes for nearly every construct that was part of our survey had a positive change. So people perceived the probability of security breaches as higher post the training, and for example, also their response efficacy and self-efficacy, even though not as high of a change, were increased. And what was part of the survey was also a qualitative section where we asked for feedback, which was overwhelmingly positive. Most of the negative was about the technical sort of setup. But what we found most interesting was that people actually wrote things such as you can see on the slide, the patterns in passwords made an impression and will give cause to a change in my own behavior, which is exactly what we were looking for, right? So just to reiterate, as part of this training, we have not told them to go and change their passwords. We didn't give them specific guidelines. The idea of this training was to have it next to the existing cybersecurity guidelines in a company, but to motivate you to actually follow them rather than to just see them as annoying. So to summarize, we built a simulation-based tool or training serious game where we try to focus on motivation rather than on teaching and transferring like sort of straightforward knowledge that you could also read. We see an indication of a change in motivation, at least for the office workers that we had part of the survey now. Part of future work is both to try and expand it to other areas, so other subjects or organization types, which is being discussed now already at the IT University of Copenhagen. And yes, so this I already covered. And of course also to see if it actually lasts this change as well. That is something else. And then these are just some of the results, and at the QR code you can find more information. Thank you.
Questions for the speaker?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. As someone who, we have an ethical hacking course at KDH, so we have to think a lot about the same questions. And one trade-off is when you design these things is when does it become a bit too game-like? Maybe in this case, since this is intended to be more of a training task, maybe that's less of a problem, I suppose.
I mean, it is something we struggled with, right, and really try to avoid the game aspect, because that's what we could see in sort of the existing work, that a lot of these things that exist for non-IT people, right, is very game-like, is often with cartoons, essentially. So what we try to do is keep it fun and something that you want to engage with, but at the same time as well, keep it into the real tools. So I think,
because one thing that is seen based on the impression is that it's very guided.
Yes.
And in the hacking course, what the additional step is that the students have to do a lot of iterating work, which is part of the hacking process.
Yeah.
So, but maybe it's not bad that they get the impression that it's very easy to hack, because that's the intention.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, that is the type of course that we had, right? But then the target audience for this training that we made is people who only use Microsoft Office. So, like, without the guide, there was no way that people would complete it. From what we also saw when we were performing the study, what we tried to do is sort of make as many of these guiding steps optional, right? So you can sort of skip ahead, but we also had to fit it into, you know, like a half an hour to an hour course max. That was the absolute max that companies are willing to invest their employees' time into taking such a training.
Right. And a short follow-up question. With the pre-post questionnaire, what's the control group in that case?
Yes, so that is one of the things that we did not have the resources or time to include in this one, and which we, in the paper, suggest also for future work that there should be a control group, but we also had a very hard time defining what exactly would be a group sort of null case, because most of these trainings are very different in also what they're trying to achieve. So I think the best scenario that we discussed is, as we see this as a complement to a sort of more traditional IT security training, which gives you guidelines from the company, that you have people, that both groups take that training, and this is sort of an add-on to see if it increases sort of the compliance to a company's policies.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes.
Quick one, I promise. When you were developing the game, there are a couple of works of, I guess, Dr. Yusuf Albiram, which we developed also. Did you find any impact of the length of the video or the training when you were developing or piloting for this research?
Not per se, it wasn't a big focus of it, right? We had this goal of like keeping it sort of limited. I think the only thing I can say about it is that from the qualitative answers and we had some informal interviews after, is that it very much depended per person, how much they were engaged in it. But what we heard back from a lot of participants is that if a coworker did the same training, had a few or two coworkers, that it really sparked a discussion, and that actually sort of the increased understanding and then the discussion that followed helped a lot in motivation. But we haven't observed or noticed anything regarding the duration. But we also did for